Hey, this is Jay.
And this is Mike, and welcome to our special bonus episode of the Your Morning Coffee podcast, our Vinyl Roundtable discussion.
Yeah, we recently sat down with vinyl experts Michael Kurtz from Record Store Day, Billy Fields from Warner Music Group, Bill Hein from Pressing Business, and we sat down to discuss the state of the vinyl union, the experience of listening to vinyl, production times, capacity, and much more.
We also talk about ownership versus access versus fandom, who's buying vinyl, the art of the tune stack for vinyl, the trend of artists releasing physical first, used vinyl, Record Store Day, and much, much more.
Much, much more. So without further ado, here's our Vinyl Roundtable. Let it roll.
Stand by for transmission.
This is London calling.
Wake up! The revolution is at hand!
Your morning coffee is on the air. 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 On the air.
Standing by.
Your morning coffee, the weekly music news for the new music business. It's the highly curated, agitated, advocated, moderated, and liberated digital music information that you need to know. We are your digital music authority. And now from our studios in Hollywood, California, here's your hosts, Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart.
I got a dusty old pile of vinyl records sitting on my floor. I've played each one of them over and over dozens of times or more. All I've got is a beat-up chair, a mattress, a fork, another to spare, and that dusty old pile of records on my floor. I got Willie Whalen and Woody Guthrie, Jimmy Buffett, I love it, and Bobby Gentry, Jerry Jeff, Bob Dylan, Donnie Fritz, Dead and the Doors, Patsy Cline, John Prine, and more. I got Jackson Brown, Towns Van.
Well, thanks everybody for making the time. We certainly appreciate it. And we're going to start by going around the horn, and in the length of the tweet, tell us what you do and what was the first vinyl 45 or album or both you ever bought with your own money. Who do you want to start with, Jay?
Let's start with Bill.
Okay. First 45, I actually have a clear memory of this. Seeds Pushing Too Hard with a picture sleeve at Sears in Woodland Hills, California.
Ooh.
First album, Monkey's Headquarters at Wallach's Music City. And I remember I had enough money for one album, and I was deliberating between Sgt. Pepper and Monkey's Headquarters. Monkeys got the nod. A week later, I got Sgt. Pepper.
Nice.
I've done time at Warehouse Records, Music Plus, both retail, Enigma Records, Restless Records, Ryko Disc, Caroline Astor Works, Live Nation. I'm now a partner in a vinyl pressing plant, Pressing Business, and two record labels, Flatiron Recordings and Label 51.
And Billy, you want to go next?
Sure. I mean, now I have to live up to something from what Bill just said. I started working in record retail in 1986 at Tower Records, Watt Avenue in Sacramento, California. I've been with the Warner Music Group on August 1st. It will be 30 years. I am presently the Warner Music Group's vinyl expert. And I think, as I said previously, and again, Michael Kurtz can confirm or deny this, I think that from the major label standpoint, I'm the most vocal advocate for independent retail and everything that we do with them. I don't have a memory of purchasing Kiss Alive 2, but that was definitely the first record I ever owned. And single, It's an AC/DC single, but I don't remember what it was. I grew up in a very, 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 very small town that did not have a record store, that did not have a drugstore, that had a record bin. So me and records as a youthful agitator was very few and far between.
And Michael.
Yeah, Michael Kurtz. That story confirms in my mind why you're so maniacal about supporting physical goods in record stores. Yes, you are the most vocal proponent of physical goods in record stores specifically. My first 7-inch I got was the Beatles, Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane. Remember dropping it on my parents' Sears Kenmore big console, and it just sounded bigger than anything I'd ever experienced. It was incredible. First album was The Doors' People Are Strange, and first album my mom ever bought for me was Weasels Rip My Flesh by Frank Zappa.
That explains everything, Mr. Kurtz.
Yeah.
That does.
What about you, Mike?
Okay, I'll go first. Single was Beatles' Hey Jude, and album was In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida by Iron Butterfly at Tower Records up in Sacramento, 1969.
Nice. Mine was Carole King, I Feel the Earth Move, 45, and Cher, Gypsies, Tramps, and Thieves. My grandfather's barbershop was next door to a jukebox repair place, and so they would sell off the old records, and we bought a lot of those 45s. And like you guys, I spent a lot of time working in record stores, about 5 years in an indie, another 5 years at Tower Records in Portland, Oregon. Worked at Universal for 18 years, and alongside of Billy over at Warner Music Group for another 5. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
It reminds me too is that you used to buy records not only at record stores but at like the Broadway here in Southern California, in these odd places. Hardware stores had records. It was a fun time.
J.C. Penney.
Yeah.
Well, let's kick it off with a quick State of the Union, really fast. I'm going to go through the U.S. numbers. Vinyl's up 10% year over year. It's 17 years of annual growth, which is amazing. Makes up about 71% of U.S. physical revenue, and vinyl continues to outsell CDs. Last year, 43 million versus 37 million. Worldwide, on the IFPI side, physical is about 18% of the recorded music business, up 13.4% to $5 billion. And surprisingly to a lot of people, the number one physical market is Japan by far, and they still have 90 Tower Records locations there.
Pretty impressive. And, does any of these things surprise you guys? And just kind of comment on these?
Would you mind if I actually correct a couple things?
Mm-hmm. No, by all means.
For one, it's 18 straight years of growth, not 17.
I'll hang my head in shame. Thank you.
That's all right. It's totally fine. I think that the other thing is that while this is through 2023, I think it's also important for us because it is now mid-year. We haven't yet seen the mid-year reports, but through first quarter, UK is up 14%, France is up 7%, Germany's up 3.6%, Netherlands up 1.6%. Because we have a very strange and odd relationship with how our market is measured presently, it's very hard to determine exactly what the U.S. is up through the first quarter. But right now, I'm going to say it's in the range of about 10 to 12%. So even with all of that growth from the past, in the first quarter of 24, we're also still actually in an upward trajectory.
Fantastic. Well, let's talk about the experience of listening to vinyl first. It is such a different experience than any other format, especially streaming. Let's go around the horn. Bill, talk about the experience of listening to vinyl versus other formats.
Well, I think there's a ritual to it, starting with tearing off the shrink wrap, removing the disc and inner sleeve, pulling the disc out, putting on the turntable. It's like cooking. I mean, you can order from Uber Eats and food just arrives in a bag, or you can go to the grocery store, select ingredients, open a cookbook, sit on the stove. I think you're more involved in the process. You aren't creating the music, but like the creator's handed it off to you and the final steps are to you. And I think that somehow just engages the senses more rather than just, I don't know, turning on your phone or listening to music in an elevator or something. You're involved. You've bought in a little. And then I think a big part of it is having the 12-inch by 12-inch, maybe a gatefold, maybe with a lyric insert to look at and read as you listen. I think that's a very big part of it. And I think that's a big part of why vinyl has bounced back. People missed it, and it's one of those things, how can I miss you until you go away? Well, vinyl almost completely went away. People clearly missed it. A whole new generation got turned on to it. And I think that's the experience. So that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, excellent. Michael, how about you?
I'm weird. I'm just an odd bird in so many ways. And part of my oddity when it comes to records is this sense of ownership that I feel like I have when I buy the record. I feel like there's a real connection. And as illogical as it is, because the artist has no idea that I'm buying the record or whatever. But in my mind, there's a connection made and it's a real personal thing. So I feel it most when I get the album first and put it on and listen to it, and then sort of commit to the time it takes to really understand an album, which is very different than a single. And I'll talk about singles in a second, but albums require, it's not that much different than watching a movie. It requires you to be really engaged and to try to understand what the artist is communicating to you. And of course, if you're a fan of that, then it's incredibly rewarding, or it can be disappointing too if the artist goes into a direction that you didn't expect. But anyway, there's that. And then 7 inches, I just think are the coolest in the sense that, in a traditional sense, where it has whatever song the artist really thinks has the broadest appeal or is communicating some bigger message or something. And then the B-side is like a love letter to the fan. Here's a little something that is not on the album, and it's almost like a secret message kind of thing. So you see how my weird brain works. I just feel like it's a real personal thing, and I don't get that from streaming. Streaming is basically for me. Streaming is listening to my kids' playlist, making my own playlist of songs to listen to while I'm hiking or something like that. While I'm doing something else, I guess is really what it comes down to. Yeah, that's it. All I have to say about it.
And Billy?
I've talked about this in a lot of different ways over the years. I think one of the things that is still most prominent in my mind around what it's like listening to records or why it's a different experience is for those people that purchase records to play them, there are very few. I'm going to back up a tiny bit. There are very few moments any of us are alive where we're actually completely 100% in the moment of what it is we're doing. We're always doing something else. There seems to be always some other thing grabbing your attention. But when you reach out to put your stylus onto a record, you are 100% in that moment. So for me, it is this laser focus of being present, and you can't get that any other way, because any other time that you consume music now in the present, it requires you to be doing something else, right? You're on your phone, you're moving somewhere, you're doing this, your headphones, you're linking, you're talking, you're whatever. Records, it's in the moment. The other thing, and this is especially for those folks that buy records that don't necessarily play them, I think that it is, to Michael's point, I think it is 100% about an idea of ownership and connection to the artist that you cannot get in any other way. And lastly, I also think, if it's not on a record, the shit doesn't count. So.
Nice. Let's talk about, excuse me, a little out of order here. Let's talk about the tune stack for vinyl. I was talking to a producer the other day, and he was talking to me about how records were made back when he was making these hit records, how you started a record a certain way. And I'm talking an album. The last song on side one, he wanted to make sure there wasn't any huge beats or heavy bass because that might throw the needle off. But you wanted something that was so good that it forced you to flip that album over and listen to the next side. And I think that's one of the things that was lost when going to downloads, streaming, is that deliberate way of creating an album, and then the artist's vision of that creation sort of got lost with shuffle and people picking off tracks and that a little bit. Bill, talk about a little bit, because you're so involved in vinyl production. Talk about the way that people put together an album versus maybe just a streaming playlist.
Well, as you just touched upon, the order does matter. And sort of going back to when I first started getting involved with, releasing records, but, also CDs and cassettes. But the album, sequencing the vinyl album came first. And then, if you made a cassette or CD, you would generally just go with that order. But the thought went into what are the songs on side A and side B, and if it's a double album, C and D, and what song starts the side, what side ends the side. And there were two considerations. One is just the format, and you're better off when you're cutting the lacquer, making the louder songs towards the, first grooves, the outside, and the quieter songs towards the inside. But you also have the artistic, how do the songs flow from flow to flow? Many albums tell a story, and not necessarily, prog rock, thematic opuses like Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, but there is an artistic reason for song order. So you're balancing that, and where you break the side, you're breaking the flow. So that was something, in the 80s we thought about a lot. And with the rise of the compact disc, that thinking didn't really matter, because being on the inside of the CD is actually spinning faster, but it didn't matter. You're still pulling the bits off the disc at the same rate. So that art kind of went away as the other formats became dominant, but now it's coming back a little. I really enjoy, on the label side of our business, talking to artists about song order, and the younger artists have never done this before, and the artists who've been around for a while are thinking, cool, I used to do this, right? Giving a lot of thought to the song order and where you split the sides, et cetera, et cetera. So, it's something I enjoy immensely. I don't get involved in the studio saying do this or that, but I do love when the tracks come in and, collaborating and being a sounding board for kind of how it's going to fit on a vinyl disc.
Michael?
Just hearing you say that reminded me of a conversation I had with a woman running a record label, and how she has to talk to artists now in the streaming world and say, never have a slow fade in on a song like you could have on a classic record or something that builds up the drama. You can't do that in the streaming world, because the way it works is if the fan doesn't engage, in the first 20 seconds, they just hit the next track. And so it's kind of a suicidal thing for an artist to think in terms of the art versus how it's consumed on streaming. That's another difference between the two. Albums are about art and about, an expression of a bigger idea. Streaming is about one song. Try to just get in there and get out. That's it. So yeah, it's when you dig deep and get nerdy about it all, these sort of truths come up, and you start to understand why the music world is so different now than it was a quarter century ago. It's just a completely different thing. So, again, I think part of what the struggle we're in right now is you have companies like Warner's, which is devoted to the full spectrum of providing artists everything from the streaming side to the physical side, and really supporting it on the physical side with gorgeous packaging, really well thought out rollouts, all that stuff, to other labels now where it's all about streaming, and they don't really care about how what the artist's vision is. And it sounds cold and kind of mean to say that, but it's just true. They don't. You can't. These two things are two different, models. Anyway, I'm just sharing that. It's kind of observations I make as I navigate the music industry after 30 or 40 years. You really see these changes happening, and I'm glad that people like Billy are around to really super serve the artist, because that's one thing I don't think is discussed enough, or really the realization isn't made, is that the album is the vision of the artist. It almost always is. Even when it's a new megastar like Taylor Swift, if she's a true artist and her albums are experiences. It's not, she's not thinking just in terms of must turn out a hit song for streaming. She does that, does it well, but she's also more complicated and more aware, and more of an artist than maybe some others are.
Billy, try to add on to that.
I think the only pushback I would say to any of this is that I think, though, that to use Jay's terminology, the tune stack, I think the tune stack has adapted to the way in which it's delivered, because I think of every classic hip hop record that we still care about today, they're very specific about the tune stack, and that was all CDs, and that was 70 plus minutes on a disc, but that was way more than this 45, right? So it all depends on the era when the records came out and what the technology was that let you do it. I mean, think about how horrible the experience was. I'm going to say something now that many listeners will be like, what's an 8-track? But the 8-track would click in the middle of the song. Talk about not caring about the artistic vision. The industry has made bad decisions that sort of lines up with whatever the technological sort of supply or delivery vehicle is at the time. And so I think that when you look at it, there are artists and there are label entities, A&R folks, executives, marketing people that really understand what the flow of the delivery needs to be. And then they adjust with the artist in mind, hopefully, how best to actually deliver that message. And I think that, just for me, my own personal experience, I like records. I like the way they flow from side to side. I like to see the way in which they plan out those songs. And to Bill's point, the technological aspect about as you get closer to the inside of the record, it is harder for your tone arm to track. So you shouldn't have really loud music. But metal records did. Iron Maiden records did. Scorpions records did. They made it work. Right. So it is about sort of that balance between what am I trying to say as an artist? How does this work inside the medium that we're actually using to deliver this music? And then what is the carrier at this point? So now, all bets are off, because you only need 6 seconds on a TikTok clip. It's I don't even know how you would plan a record 20 years, 30 years down the line, the way it's going now, because it's getting shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. Yeah. So I think there are very strong arguments to be made for every sort of carrier that exists. And there are really great examples of how they've planned and done it well. And there are examples that are this isn't working out. That was terrible.
Yeah. We went from an era of ownership to access, and now we're sort of the pendulum swinging back to ownership and all of the great things that come along with that, where, to your point, you can show your artists that you're connected with them, support them, with vinyl, for example. I'm curious today, and I'd like to pose this to Michael, who's buying vinyl today?
What I hear from record stores is the majority, and it's a pretty close split, but it's a good place to start, is female. That started around 8 years ago. We noticed that happening. It used to be taunted almost on every record store day by John Silva, the manager, sending me photos, and it'd all be these gray beards, bald heads and stuff, guys like me, bald spots and everything. And then there was this transition where I was sending him photos of all these young girls that were in the store buying records. That sort of changed the face of record stores, and a lot more employees became female. It used to, before that period, it was almost all male, but now I think it's flipped the other way. So that's a starting point. You're like, who is buying vinyl? You start with that, for at least in my world, that's where it starts. It's a lot younger now. I have to put on my record store day hat for a second and just say, we did a fantastic job at getting young people into vinyl records. We really did, by consciously going after our, younger artists, getting them involved. The pivot or the big breaking point of it was 3 years ago when Taylor Swift got involved. And it was really problematic in the beginning because you'd have record store owners, I'd have them come up to me and literally cuss me out because of Taylor Swift. They just, for them, it was, Black Sabbath, 10 Years After, Yes, just go down the list. All great bands, all of them, I have all their albums. It's all, most of them live. I love those bands. But I can let go of that, or I can have that experience at the same time. I can discover a great artist like Taylor Swift, who I think is one of the great artists of all time. So we were lucky that we made this transition without too much bloodshed. There were people upset about it, but they quickly came around to understand that the flip side of the modern world is having a record come out by somebody like Olivia Rodrigo or Noah Kahan or Taylor Swift, and then being able to reach 20 million fans at one time saying, go buy this vinyl record at a record store. That changed everything. And again, it was almost all driven by women. Not entirely, there's plenty of supporters who have penises, but that's kind of like a significant thing, because I think a lot of folks, even especially in my age, tend to think that it's about the past, and it was our format. The young generation considers it their format now. They've taken it to a whole other level, which leads me into things that I want to talk about is the cost of goods and everything and how expensive vinyl has become. Because in my mind, I look at it and go, holy Christ, these packages that are made now are so gorgeous with so much obvious energy and time put into detail, and they're still fairly small runs. I'm not talking about the big hits and stuff, but most artists, Billy, you could probably speak to it. You're closer to it than I do. But these numbers are in the tens of thousands. They're not in the hundreds of thousands. Especially newer artists. Mm-hmm. So it kind of, when you start putting all the pieces together, then it kind of becomes more obvious why it's expensive, because it's an expensive thing to do just to create the art form. So, and get it to people where the corners aren't bent and the records aren't broken, or, which you took a minute for us to get through all of that. Billy could probably speak more to that than me. But definitely it was a lot of time and energy has been put into it now by companies like Warner, who really treat it like the way it should be.
I'm not paying Michael to say these things about Warner, just so we're all clear.
What? You didn't pay me? No, but
I'm not
true. Honestly, it's so weird. Billy knows we've been worked together. We've had the highest moments and the lowest moments. It's all for the greater good, because we're trying to get there. But it was about 3 or 4 years ago where we were in Billy's face going, "How the hell did you go from number one to the last, the worst?" This had to do with distribution mainly, But all of that is kind of sorted itself. Most of it has sorted itself out now, and you've gone right back to where it was. And it's a mixed bag with the other majors. It really is. I mean, I don't think they would deny it.
Yeah. And Bill, talk a little bit about you. I mean, you run a pressing plant, and I've learned a lot about that process, and I've had tours through pressing plants, and it's some of it is like steampunk. It's incredible. Talk a little bit about the mindset now of making these packages.
Well, steampunk, let me riff on that for a minute, because that's actually perfect. I never thought of that before, but it is. Many pressing plants are using machines that are 60 years old and older. that still work just fine and can make a quality product. It's really up to the operator more than the machine on making a quality record. So, and I see some of these old machines, and it's amazing to see them still pressing up records. We started with a couple of years ago when you could not buy a new press. We found 4 used Tulex Alpha presses in storage in Kansas. These machines were made in the 80s in Sweden, very good machines. They had been in England, then Brazil, then Kansas. Then we bought them and shipped them to Poland. They had not been used for years. And we didn't have blueprints. We didn't have spare parts. We had to fabricate. They now work fine, and we make thousands and thousands of records on them. And we've since bought many, many brand new presses from the company that sort of took over the Tulex process, called Phoenix Alpha out of Sweden. So steampunk, I'm writing that down. I'm going to use that. Well, I want to talk about the consumer just briefly. I would love to know more about who's buying vinyl records because I'm intensely curious. I'm a record store day devotee. I live in Denver. I went to Twist and Shout Records. There's 2 really great stores in Denver, Wax Trax and Twist and Shout. So I basically flipped a coin and went to Twist and Shout. I stood in line 90 minutes in the snow outside waiting to get in with other people. And it looked like a broad cross section of Denver. Young people, men, women, older guys, me. And it was interesting, and all sorts of music was selling. So I have to think that this whole rebound in vinyl is pretty broad-based. A lot of people getting back into vinyl, a lot of people getting into it for the first time, and pretty spread out between male and female. The hot title seemed to be Paramore, at least at Twist and Shout. That was one people were talking about. I wanted to get the Yardbirds B-side out, and I was happy it was still there when I got in. And I ended up spending about $400 more on total impulse purchases. So I'm eager to know more. My ears are open because I am a part owner of a pressing plant, and we do a lot of business for labels, big labels, medium-sized labels, small labels. I'm most curious on the catalog orders, particularly catalog reorders, because that tells me something. It's sold through. And when you start seeing the same title ordered over and over and over, it's telling you something. There's consistent demand for that. And it's not necessarily the big albums from 50, 60, 40, 30, 20 years ago, but it's titles you kind of recognize, and that's kind of a classic, right? Maybe it wasn't a big chart record when it came out, but it's grown in stature over the years. What people always say about Velvet Underground, and bands like that, never really charted high, but their influence and reputation grew over the years and decades. On the catalog, I see a lot of those. It could be something that was a hit then, is it still big, Fleetwood Mac Rumors or something. But a lot of the stuff is surprising, that's just kind of constantly turning and turning and turning. I don't know, does that kind of answer your query?
It does. And I have a follow-up question. Actually, I want to back up just a little bit on the manufacturing side. In terms of institutional knowledge, a lot of the people that knew how to manufacture records and knew the nuances of that left and retired. How do you handle kind of educating your staff with these new pressing machines? I would imagine it's a fairly steep learning curve, and it's probably hard to find some of these old folks that are around the first time.
Yeah, and that's absolutely a factor. And, vinyl records almost totally went away. And I think all of us here know that, but I'll repeat the statistic. There was a year, I can't remember if it was 2007, something like that. Global consumption of vinyl records was under 1 million. We had, global for the whole year. We had a single PO for one title, 1 million discs last summer. That was a double album, so 500,000 double albums. One title, one PO. That's how much the business, that's how small it got. Yes, and making vinyl records is not easy. A lot of people who've started pressing plants in recent years who did not have experience in the business have had an unpleasant surprise how difficult it is. Every press is a little bit different. It's like really keeping an old car running. It's an artisanal process, right? Anyone can brew beer, but it's hard to brew good beer. And I can give 100 other examples, but the press operators, the plant managers, these people really they're artists themselves, because it is hard to make a quality vinyl record consistently. And it's not something you can go to school and learn. And, when vinyl records went away, the factories shut down. Almost all the factories in the world shut down. Bertelsmann, their manufacturing arm, I believe they scrapped 150 vinyl presses, scrapped them, if you can imagine. The people got early retirements or decided to, go play golf in Florida. And probably the most precious asset any pressing plant has is a plant manager that really knows how to make records. So, you can have 50 presses and, all the capital in the world. If you don't have people that really know that process and are good at it, you can't make a good record.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
That's probably the biggest challenge the industry has now, because, the lead time challenge, that's gone now. Everyone's turning around orders pretty quickly. There's no real issues in the supply chain anywhere. But, having that team that knows what they're doing, that's golden and hard to replace.
Yeah. Let me shift gears here a little bit. I want to ask you guys about used vinyl, because I'm not sure that we, as an industry, pay enough attention to it. I mean, I don't see any charts on used vinyl yet. When I go record shopping, a lot of what's being purchased is used. I would love to see what that behavior is and see a chart of used vinyl. And clearly not everybody can afford some of that premium vinyl because, frankly, a lot of it's very expensive. Michael, Billy, talk a little bit about your thoughts on used vinyl.
I think that the best way to sort of position used in the context is that for the modern music business, when it comes to physical and especially vinyl, new and used are symbiotic pieces of the same market. You need both to be very, very successful in having a store and having a shop and having an offering. And if you are weak on one side or the other, you're going to be weak entirely. So it's important for you to actually have a very smart buyer that buys only used goods and really knows what they're doing. Bill talking about, having a good press operator, just dealing with this, with music and dealing with the various formats in which we've come up with over the years as an industry. It's really important to have people that understand sort of how that format, how that piece operates inside the whole. I think if you want to look at it from a unit standpoint, and I think it'd be very tough to peg a revenue value, but I'm sure if you talk to Discogs, they could probably come up with a very decent revenue value for used, although they don't yet have a mechanism to tell you exactly what they're selling that is a used piece compared to a new piece. But I usually look at the used market as being like 7 to 10 times the new market in units. When you talk to shops, for the most part, people that I've spoken to over the last 20 years, that's essentially what they peg it as. Obviously, in the early 2000s, the used ratio was a hell of a lot higher than it was now. But I would say it's probably still somewhere in the range of 7 to 10 unit wise compared to what we saw on the new side.
What do you think, Michael?
Used vinyl, it's the thing that allows record stores to exist on so many levels, on a personal, like a sort of a customer relations level. It is super important because that's where the conversations happen more than new product within a store. People are wanting to sell or buy so it makes this really strong connection between the record store and its community. So in that sense, it's really important. On the economic or business side, if it weren't for used record stores could not exist. There's not enough margin in new. We struggle with it all the time because on one hand we see like how expensive it is to make and ship new releases, but by the same token, the stores have to try to sell that to a customer without them having any understanding, and then looking at it and going, $30 for one record just seems like a lot of money. So the used is there, so they can maybe, if we're marketing or trying to get them to buy a new album and turn them on to something. On the new side, we've got that, but then they can go to the used bin and browse and find records that are much more reasonably priced. So that's kind of my thoughts on it.
I would just add the one thing too, though, is that there are still scores and scores and scores of records that are fabulous, excellent records that you should have in your collection that have not been reissued since original issue.
Yeah.
So the vast history of the music business.
Great
if you
point.
think that going to a streaming service and looking at whatever the 100 million plus quadrillion tracks that you can now have, it's dwarfed by what exists that's been pressed into vinyl since the inception of the format. And there's so much music that you have never heard and it's going to be brand new and it's going to blow your mind. You're going to hear every original sample that you get in the tracks that are on a Nas record or a Jay-Z record or a Public Enemy record or whatever you want to say, right? Like the whole history is in records. And those records are in record stores. They're not at Amazon. They're not at big box stores. They're in record stores.
Yeah, for sure.
And that part of the fun and magic is searching.
Entirely magical.
Absolutely.
It's like a kismet moment of like epiphany every oh my God, I can't believe this is here. I mean, it's like, why not go somewhere where you're going to be like, that was the best surprise I've had in 2 weeks. I just found a record in a record store. This is a fantastic result. Like, of course people want to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And, I all for sustainability in record manufacturing and materials. However, when I hear records going into landfills, I get a little riled. Records should never go into landfills. If you don't want your record anymore, please don't throw it away. Take it to Goodwill, trade it in a used record store. It's part of our cultural history. And, for what Billy points out. And in fact, I'll give a recent example. I was involved in Rykodisc putting out the album Big Star in Space, a great album. Jay, you and I talked about that at South by Southwest. It's not available in streaming services, and it's kind of out of print. It's a great album, so you have to find a used copy of it somewhere if you want to hear it. And that goes back to 2005. So you dial back to the 90s, 80s, 70s, 60s, 50s. There's a huge repertoire that you can only find used. So.
Yeah, Billy, you bring up such a great point, and I'm so glad you brought this up. That magic of finding something that you're looking for. I'm a big Cheap Trick fan. I've got all of their vinyl from all the different countries, all their 45s. But there was one 45 that I had looked for forever, and I found it in Portland, Oregon. It's the white label, radio version of He's a Whore, which was off their first album, their first track. I remember going through the 45s, and I found that, and my heart rate increased, and I was like, oh my God. And I looked around to see if anybody saw me get it, right? And then I slowly walked to the counter. Oh, please, please, please sell. And I bought it, and I had to leave the store. I mean, I had to go home with that thing. I had looked for that thing for years. There's such a magic of finding, there's rediscovery. And I'd love to talk to you about rediscovery because, when I worked at Universal, there were certain albums, John Coltrane, whatever, Love Supreme, just year after year after year, always sold. People are rediscovering the Beatles. People are rediscovering all these classic things. There's a magic to that. But I just wanted to kind of put an exclamation point.
Jay, I would say, look, there is a group of the buyers that are rediscovering. You're absolutely correct. but I think you have to recalibrate your thinking. No, this is ongoing evolutionary discovering. Every kid that's 13 hasn't heard Metallica's Black Album until he does for the first time. Or again, Nas's Illmatic until he does for the first time. Or Joni Mitchell's Blue until he does for the first time. Or until she does for the first time, right? Like, and that is the magic of what music is about. It is this cross-generational sort of deep history dive into all of it. And you can pass it along just by saying, like, just listen to the grooves in this bad boy. And you can get all of it. Oh, you want to know what Laurel Canyon is like? Listen to this record. Oh, you want to know what West Germany, East Germany was like? Listen to this record. Oh, you want to know what the strife in South America was about? Listen to these records. Like, you get a history as well as sort of a this magic of what it does to your body. I love the fact that I could see you finding that 45. And frankly, what happened in that moment was like, did anybody else see that? Because they're going to want it. And I want this for myself. And I need to get out of here.
Exactly.
Right? Like you feel you got away with something.
I sure did.
Which is exactly what happens when a kid listens to a record that feels a bit dangerous. I'm getting away with something. I'm like opening up a world that's mine.
Yeah.
But it's not a rediscovery. It is a new discovery.
That's right.
And that's it. I mean, you don't get that shit on. I'm sorry, but you just don't get that shit on.
And that's what I was trying to say in the beginning. Because for me, that's in my own little world. It's that personal. It's that, like, it's about the connection.
100%.
Yeah, it's so strange because when you finally meet your artist that you're like, idolize, your brain goes back to all of that, and it's just trying to process all the experiences you had with the records, and now you are meeting them at a meet and greet at a record store or something like that. And I don't know, all of it makes my skin kind of tingle.
So excited. Hey, Billy, there is a trend certainly for artists releasing physical first now. And when you're on the inside of a label, does that come up? Is that, people do the rank and file in a label not really want to do that? Or how do you guys balance that decision?
It's interesting. You're saying it's a trend. I mean, it's a very, very small thing right now. It is happening, but it's not happening all that much. And I think I might surprise all of you with what I'm going to say. I think that what you need to do if you're an artist is you need to have your music where your fans are, period. I think that by dictating to them where they can get your music, I don't know that that's the best way that you can actually connect to your fan. I think that a combined date of everything at once is far better than not. But we also have to admit the really terrible fact that right now, even though we all moved to this global release day of Fridays because we're going to have unified release to blind, it's like, none of that shit happened because we're still putting a ton of stuff out on digital. It doesn't come out on physical for months and months and months, or ever for that matter, right? So we don't really still have a unified thing. So I think that it absolutely works really, really well for specific genres and labels that employ it, because essentially they're not getting the boost on streaming platforms that help them to make money, and focusing those fans. I mean, I think of International Anthem as a jazz label out of Chicago. They're super fantastic. I love what they do. I love everything about how they present themselves, the way they sell records, the way they produce records, the way they look, the whole 9 yards. I'm in. Like, I buy all their records. You got me. And I understand that they are lost in the streaming world because it's not the kind of records that people are streaming, because that's not how streaming works. Streaming is meant for consumption. It's not meant for listening. So if you're a label that is about listening, I get it. But if you're, from a major label standpoint, I want everything the day that it comes out. I want all the heat, I want all the noise, and I want all the pressure for that date to be able to put music into a fan's hands wherever they want it.
Yeah.
That would be my take on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, I'm with Billy on that. First of all, I'm happy to get the vinyl and CD available when the digital's coming out. That's its own challenge. one of my business partners, Fred Goldring, is a big advocate of releasing physical first. And, he's written an article with Will Page on this and makes a very good point. And it has a lot of merit. I think on the other side, if you want new fans, I think you have to be on the streaming services because it's just part of music discovery. I'm an avid reader of music magazines. Like my favorites are Shindig, Record Collector, Ugly Things. And that's where I discover a lot of cool new music. I'll read an article. First thing I do is go to Apple Music and see if it's up there and give it a listen. And if I like it, I want to own the vinyl. If I didn't have that intermediate step, I would think twice about sending $30 off to pick up that vinyl. But if I hear it and like it, easy. So I encourage artists not to cut out that step, to be available on all the streaming services. And to put aside whatever opinion you have, whether Spotify is ripping people off or not, I just don't think it's relevant, particularly if you're an artist that's looking for a bigger audience. I think you just have to be there. So, yeah. In other words, I think it's part of the ecosystem. Vinyl streaming.
I love the point that you just said about the fact that you read about something and then you go and you sync it so you can listen to it to see if you want to buy it. So just real quick, because this touches on everything we're just talking about, right? So I get fed a guy on Instagram. I don't know his name right now, but he talks about great records. This record, Lee Dorsey, it's a great record. Meters is a backing band. I don't just saying as a producer. I know about this record. I've heard the songs, but didn't know about the record. He talks about it. I go to Apple. I sync it. I go to Discogs and buy a used record because the new version I'm not interested in, but I am interested in the original version. And I bought this from a shop in the UK via Discogs, and now it's in my hands. Like, this world is a magical, fantastic world we live in. This is not 1975 where you couldn't do this because there was no connection. It's not the future where this stuff is now obsolete. Like, we're in a golden age of being able to actually discover and listen to music because of vinyl. This isn't happening because streaming happened, right? It happened because vinyl happened and streaming happened to be happened at the same time.
Oh yeah, it is the golden age for record collectors. I just think back in 1970s when I was avidly collecting prog rock and, make whatever jokes you want at my expense. I was a very avid prog rock collector. And much of what I wanted was not released in the US and would never be. And I would hear a rumor of some great prog band from like Italy or Finland, and I'd write it down. And I had a piece of paper I always had with me with these band names. And, I would go into Aaron's or Tower and search the import bins and, Moby Disc, talk to Bob Say, have you heard of this? Is it gettable? Can I special order it? There were records I spent years trying to find. Mm-hmm. Now I can read about it, buy it on Discogs, buy it on Amazon, go down to Twist and Shout or Wax Tracks. It's amazing. I mean, just dial back a few years, and I never want to go back to that world. I never want to wait years to hear something I'm curious about. Yeah. I've gotten spoiled by the tools that are out there. So
it's a beautiful thing. It is. So as we wind down here, I want to bring up something that Mike brought up a little earlier, and that is, where do you sort of see things progressing when it comes to vinyl and fandom and record store day and all of these things? We've seen a tremendous amount of growth. Where do you see the next 5 years or so with vinyl as a configuration?
We'll start with Michael.
I think that everyone's done a really good job at messaging out about vinyl, and the discovery has been pretty phenomenal for everybody. I don't see it getting any smaller. How big it's going to get, I don't know, because it takes me back to my earliest days of working in record stores, like 1978, 79. These are glory years for albums coming out. It's all like the Talking Heads, the Fleetwood Mac, Tom Petty. You just get, just Weather Report. There's just incredible music that's coming out. On the jazz side, it was on fire with Pat Metheny and Chicory and all this stuff. It was an incredible time, but it was very difficult to get people to come into a record store at that time. Somebody mentioned earlier the department stores, they all carried records and stuff. So most of the hits and, same as it is now with big box stores. So it was a very difficult time with the best music being produced. And here we are 60 years later, and all that music probably is getting consumed more than ever before. And I think the Ramones are way bigger than they ever were. You could barely give a Ramones album away when they came out, television, any of those bands, but now it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's huge. Vinyl's a big part of that. So I don't see it going anywhere but up. It's just going to be, bigger than we ever thought it could be. I don't know, Billy, what do you think what do you?
I'm going to harken back to some things that Bill said about how difficult it is just to make a good, consistent, quality record. We are still fighting that fight every day. There's plenty of capacity, to Bill's point, globally, certainly. And there's still plenty of records being produced that are not being produced to a high enough standard. I think that if we want this to continue on the trajectory it's on, and I'm not suggesting we're going to have 40% growth year over year like we did in the pandemic, because that's a, frankly, once in my lifetime event. That's just not going to happen again. But we will see consistent, steady growth in the market, provided we don't screw it up. And we can screw it up in a lot of different ways. But let's just be clear, we will be responsible if we screw it up. It will be our fault. We'll price it too high. We'll think that we can just, sky's the limit, no problem. We're going to think that we can make shitty records and kids are going to keep buying them because they just want to put it on their wall when they want to listen to it, not understanding what that market is and how it changes, what the next generation wants from it, not understanding what that looks like, and not being open to the idea that it's going to be different than it is now and what it was 10 years ago. I mean, we've been doing this now for almost 20 years. I mean, think about the insanity of that. Vinyl has been on a growth trajectory for almost 20 straight years. And it's such a big business that corporations are paying attention to it. So, when that happens, it's good. And when it happens, it's also possibly bad, right? So if we are smart and we are good stewards, and I've said this many times, and I hope that you can put it on my headstone. Although I don't plan on being put in a grave when the time comes. I'm just going to be some ash somewhere in the wind, hopefully. You can just keep doing what you do. Don't screw it up, but keep the format at the height of concern. Don't worry about all the things that get put on the format. As the format survives, thrives, becomes bigger, then every boat attached to it then rises as well. It is about the format and what is best for that, not what's best for artist A or label B or distributor C. It's what's best for the format.
Nice.
100% Billy. I just endorse everything he said.
Wow, that was easy.
Jay and Mike, can I make a request?
Certainly, please.
Mastering was on your list, and actually I have a soapbox to climb on and talk about that.
I want to hear this, actually.
Before you do, for those with no prior knowledge, just explain briefly what mastering is.
You've got the recording step, which used to be done in studios that were very expensive with engineers, producers, video games in the rec room, a giant notebook full of menus that people would order out on while someone is spending a day getting a snare drum sound down. But now a lot of them are made at home, and people can very economically make remarkably good recordings in home studios. I mean, just using a laptop and some, D-to-A converters and plugins. One thing I want to, soapbox part, first of all, mastering is taking those studio recordings and adding just the final touch to them, a little bit of equalization, checking the levels. But you're going to someone who basically, the people that work in mastering studios have golden ears. and they listen to your recordings with fresh ears. If you're Fleetwood Mac, you might have been spending 18 months making those songs. Your ears are no longer fresh. So going to someone with very fresh ears who listens to it and adds a little EQ at this frequency, maybe cuts a little EQ here, maybe plays a little bit with compression in and out, and usually very small adjustments, half a dB here, half a dB there. It can make an astonishing difference. And there's some very good mastering studios on the label side. I just got a job done by Waygate, which is Bob Ludwig's old studio, now under new ownership. Astonishing. The recordings were phenomenal to start with. And both the artists and myself and my partners at the label were listening to the master tracks and we're just blown over. It was very subtle changes. We've worked with Third Man in Detroit. Anything with a crunchy guitar, we tend to send to Third Man Mastering. It's owned by Jack White. They can get great guitar sounds. Again, very small changes make a huge difference. Also, from the mastering, it goes to the manufacturing. On the vinyl side, you want the levels at a very specific level to be able to cut a good lacquer and then, eventually make a good stamper. Not enough level, your record's going to be too quiet. You're going to hear the surface noise. Too loud, that's bad too. You can't cut a good lacquer off something that's too loud. So you want that expert right in the middle between the studio and the manufacturing. It's and the soapbox part is, please don't go cheap on the mastering. Allocate a significant part of your project costs to the mastering. There's great studios out there. Welcome to 1979 in Nashville. I always want to give a shout out to. They do a lot of independent stuff. They're very economical. They're great. So find the right mastering studio for your project, and let them do their magic. It'll make a huge difference on the end product.
Yeah, don't skimp on the part that's going to actually make all the difference in the end.
Yeah, exactly.
Provided everybody else does everything else the way they're supposed to.
Yes.
If you screw that up, it ain't going to matter.
Yeah. Point. Absolutely.
Well put.
Yeah.
And I know nothing about that whole process, by the way, but I understand it enough. Like I can talk you through what a plating process is and what the stamper, mother, father, but I can talk all that through. I've never done it myself.
Yeah.
But I know that it's basically impossible to get it done well all the time, because it's like magic and alchemy and like rumor and, it's crazy. It's literally I don't believe in magic. I don't believe in ghosts. But watching a lacquer get silvered in a plant is as close to magic as I can accept.
Yeah,
it's just wow. Find that video online, guys. It's a magical moment. It's like, whoa.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. Every time I see it, it's like, ooh, that goosebump thing that you had with the Cheap Trick. It's just every time.
Yeah.
Yeah. If there's anything I want people listening to this podcast, and thank you, Jay and Mike, for inviting me. I do listen to your podcast all the time, and everyone I know in the business, I insist they subscribe. I want people to appreciate, of course, the artist is the artist, and the songwriter is an artist, and the people designing the album cover are artists. The mastering studio, they're artists. The people manufacturing the record, cutting the lacquer, doing the silvering, and then the nickel plating, and the press operator, the person doing the QC at the factory. These are all artists too. The people maintaining the press, they're all artists. And every step of the way is an artisanal process. So I would love people, just when they buy that record and they're appreciate all the people that, and the record store smart enough to stock that record, right? We should be thankful for everyone who participates in that entire chain. I
agree. And I think, when you talk about record stores, they were the original recommendation engine. I remember working in a record store and, you bought those three? You're going to love these three. It's high fidelity on steroids. And it's still the best to go in. And that's one of the things I love about Record Store Day is you're talking to other music fans. Hey, have you heard this thing? Oh, I just got this one. Have you ever heard this? I was on Record Store Days. I bought the Tinted Windows album, which hadn't been out on vinyl before. I just love it. It's like a super group, right? And I remember as I found it, I was so excited, and I was standing next to a couple of people, and we started talking about it. They'd never heard of Tinted Windows before. But as I talked to them about it, next thing you know, they bought it as well. So it's a community. It's the sum is bigger than the parts.
It's your tribe.
All this conversation reminds me of a moment in time. I think it was a Making Vinyl conference. We were in Nashville, and U2 just decided they were going to make a record for Record Store Day. It was the Blackout record. It was pressed at Third Man there in Nashville, and went in, and I saw, first of all, it's very Willy Wonka kind of experience in that studio is so clean and beautiful, and just everybody's color coded, and there's something like really fun about it. But I thought struck me as like, gosh, I wonder if I could get one copy of the record as it comes finished before it gets shrink wrapped and get it signed by everybody who touched it.
Wow.
Down the rotten line. And I got one done, and there's like 20 something signatures on it, ending with Jack White at the very end. But it's the person who did who actually stamped the record, the person who put it in the sleeve, the person who, put the folds together. It was it was a real community thing. And I tried to take that idea to label Sense and say, for Record Store Day, can you get everybody who was involved in the record to sign it? And so we can drive home the message. It's a community that creates this piece of art.
I love that. A community of artists. Gentlemen, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day. Much love and respect for all of you guys. Thank you for doing this with us.
Yeah, thanks for having us on. Appreciate it.
Thanks, you guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Right.
Anytime.
Take care.
See you.
See you.
Bye.
Joe and he's singing with the fish, I got Emmy Lou, U2, and Arlo, James Taylor, Jimmy Rogers, Hank Williams, Mojo Nixon, Hendrix Haggard, and a whole lot more. In that dusty old pile of vinyl records I got sitting on my floor. One time in San Francisco, I was standing in an airport line. One bag I had all my clothes, the other was all them old records of mine. The lady said I could only bring one bag. I had two, oh what a drag. I had to jump on the plane and leave all my clothes behind. But I got a Willie Whalen and a Woody Guthrie, Jimmy Buffett, I love it, and a Bobby Gentry, Jerry Jeff, Bob Dylan, Donnie Fritz, Dead in the Doors, Patsy Cline, John Prine, and more. I got Jackson Brown, Towns, Van Zandt, Zeppelin, Leonard Skinner, Harry Chapin, Guy Clark, Van Halen, Rita, Chris, Keith Sykes, and Country Joe, and he was singing with the fish, I got Emmy Lou, U2, and Arlo, James Taylor, Jimmy Rogers, Hank Williams, and Mojo Nixon, Hendrix Haggard, and a whole lot more. I got all the Booker T's, Tom T. Halls, Bobby Bear, Belafonte, and the New York Dolls, Billy Joe, Jimmy Croce, Kiss Crosby, Stills, and Nash, John June, and the Roseanne Cash. I got Forbert, Frommo, Stevie Ray, T-Bird, Yardbird, Sam and Dave, and it's some of y'all might have guessed already. I got piles and piles and piles of Tom Petty. In that dusty old pile of vinyl records I got sitting on my floor.